So, changing topics to compression. Compression, of course, is everybody knows about compression, and in the audio world, everybody loves compression, gets very obsessed about it. But newbies, you, students, they rarely actually know what to do with a compressor, and they rarely actually can hear it. And I gotta admit, for myself, it took a long time. I was using compression for many years before one day I heard it. And now I hear it everywhere I go all the time, and I can't unhear it. And sometimes it's very distracting because I'm like, whoa, that's overcompressed. But you will hear it with time. It just takes practice, and it just takes use of compressors. So the first question, of course, is where do we put compressors? When is it appropriate? And it almost always helps vocals, because vocals dynamic, this particular video, I'm talking through a compressor right now. It helps my vocals stay consistent so that the quiet words and the loud words, don't get lost or don't get stick out of the mix. Other instruments where it really helps is the bass. My analogy is if you're going to build a house, you need a strong foundation. In my opinion, the bass in pop music usually holds the house together. So putting a lot of compression on a bass helps the note by note, across the fretboard, high and low, be really consistent, and you are able to build your mix around it. Horns, they're a lot like vocals. They can be very loud or very quiet. They can also really use vocal compression. So what I do in my mix assignments is I say you have to use compression on critical elements, which are vocal and bass. And I want to rewind back to EQ just for a moment, because this is an unrehearsed video. Hey, you also in my mix labs have to use EQ on critical elements. Critical elements to your mix that probably much all the time need EQ is kick, snare, overheads, vocal, and bass. Okay? Those elements in all your mixes in Hybrid Mix Lab, I'm expecting some sort of EQ on. And if you don't like the EQ, decide it doesn't need it, you can bypass the EQ but leave it inserted so I know when I'm grading that you've actually tried it. Because these elements almost always need some sort of EQ. Again, this is the kick, the snare, the overheads, the bass, and lead vocal. And all the assignments mention this. So back to compression. On compression, the critical elements are vocals and bass. You can use compression on other things. Compression usually helps on kicks and snares. It adds a lot of punch. In pop music and rock music, you'll always hear compression on kick and snare. And in this class, as the weeks go on, I will push you to doing that. But at the moment, you don't have to. It's optional. But if you feel like doing it, go right ahead. Now, compression might help guitars and keyboards and other instruments. It's optional right now as you're getting started. It's not a good strategy to put a compressor on everything right away unless you know how to manage it. But a lot of experienced engineers put compressors on almost everything. You just have to know what you're doing. And of course, you can use compression for really creative things like pumping and breathing. And there's lots of recorded famous examples of weird compression effects. And that's cool if you did it on purpose. It's not cool if you did it on accident. So, how to use compression when you have no idea how to do it. So you're a beginner. Well, what's a strategy to kind of tackle compression? First, put it on these critical instruments as I've talked about. Put it on instruments that typically need it. Compression on vocals, compression on bass. It will help. Kick and snare, optional, but if you're doing rock, eventually almost everybody does it. I would say go really big with the compressor. Lower the threshold so it's very dramatic, right? So every note's getting totally squashed. Hear it, listen to it, recognize the sound of overcompression. That's very important in your growth, is to hear that. And then go subtle. Raise that threshold back up so it's barely compressing. I would say if you want to avoid side effects and for it not to sound really obvious, keep your compression so it's gain reducing no more than 6 dB. Look at the little meter, see how many dB it's taken off and level, and keep that to under -6. And that's a great subtle compression. The bass is kind of interesting. You can actually go pretty big on the bass and it won't matter. You can add 10, even 20 dB of compression on the bass. It doesn't really matter. But on vocals, if you go more than 6, you'll hear it. Or at least somebody who's used to hearing compression will hear it. So I say go big and then go subtle. Once you've got it kind of dialed in and you're seeing that meter sort of compressing on most every note, but not by very much, then adjust your makeup gain. If you're seeing minus 6 dB in gain reduction, if you're taking off 6 dB of peaks, then add about 6 dB of gain with your gain makeup. And this is the 2 steps of compression. One is to reduce to peak level, and the second is to bring the makeup level back up. And once you've done this, you will have some sort of almost, it's technically not, but kind of like unity gain sort of thing where you can go in and out of bypass, and the overall average level of the source will stay about the same. And this is fantastic because now you can go in and out of bypass and ask yourself the question, does this help? Am I hurting the source or am I destroying the source? And this is a really good question you want to ask yourself. And so getting your makeup gain to kind of equal compression, gain reduction, you'll kind of get that effect. So I would definitely do that. And you'll probably find, and this is something that I find a lot in Pro Tools mixing where you keep adding more and more and more plugins, that you can use this strategy on any plugin, and you'll find really quickly that a lot of the plugins you use are not helping you. And if they're not helping you, turn them off. And if you still want to make sure I give you credit for trying something, bypass or disable the compressor. And I'll go, okay, they tried it and they didn't want it because they didn't need it. There's one last slide to this lecture, and it talks about the order of compression and EQ in your mixing. And you know what? I'm not going to talk about it. Instead, I think you should watch the video that I've linked in the homework. It's another one of my YouTube videos, and it really gives a really effective demonstration why it makes sense most of the time to put your compression first, followed by your EQ. So go watch the video, and in this class, unless you got a darn good reason, unless you want to explain to me why you're doing it the other way, put your compressors first and your EQs second, and we can argue about it in class. Go watch that video. All right, have a great time. I hope you have success while I'm on vacation. Wait, I mean, I'm working, right? Yes, I'm on a trip working. All right, have a good day. Bye-bye.